Thanks, Whittaker. You notice that song was written by Holly Near. Show of hands, who knows about Holly Near? Holly Near is kind of a giant in a somewhat narrow band of American popular music and American traditional music. She's a writer, a composer, and she's also an actress. She appeared on the Mod Squad in the 1960s, one of the first things she ever did. But she also toured with Jane Fonda and Pete Seeger and other anti-war activists during Vietnam War protests. And she is a huge advocate for LGBT rights and for human rights in general. She's got, 29 or 30 albums out, Holly Near. So along with Jim Scott, she's kind of one of the big deal musicians in our very own hymnal. So thank you, Whittaker, for that. Traditionally, we use this time in our service to review the 7 principles, and we've started something a little bit new this year. We're taking, for many Sundays, we'll focus on one, and because of Ray's talk, I want to focus on the 4th principle, which is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. To dive a little bit deeper, dive more deeply into the 4th principle, I want to do a reading, and this one's from a Reverend Paige Getty, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister of some note. She has a congregation in Columbia, Maryland, but she's from Savannah, Georgia, and she earned a bachelor's degree at Wesleyan College in Macon, and then went on to the Harvard Divinity School. And she's got Paige Getty has a reflection on the 4th principle, and it's in an interesting book, The 7 Principles in Word and Worship. And I don't know, Connie, if we have this in our library, but it might be something that's kind of useful. So I'm just going to do a short reading from Reverend Getty, a reflection on the 4th principle. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond the bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. This privilege calls us not to be isolated and self-centered, believing that our single perspective trumps all others, but rather to be humble, to be open to the great mysteries of truth and meaning that life offers. And those mysteries may speak to us through our own intuition and experience, but also through tradition, community, conflict, nature, and relationships. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalism makes sacred the right and responsibility to engage in this free and responsible quest as an act of religious devotion. Institutionally, we have left open the questions of what truth and meaning are, acknowledging that mindful people will in every age discover new insights. Let's move on to our offering. Our offerings to this fellowship, big or small, strengthen us. And whether they're offerings of money or time or talent or energy, they are given and received in the spirit of grateful fellowship. And while Orm and Elise are passing out the baskets, Thomas Trinh will play a Bach partita in A minor. Ray Rankin has jumped right into being a member. He's become one of our regular speakers, and it's not really surprising to those of us who met Ray through our UU bicycling group. It must be said that Ray is probably the most knowledgeable bicyclist in our group, having bicycled to Florida many times. Interesting way to get to Florida. Ray is a retired English teacher. He's a writer. He's a poet, and most of all, he's among all my friends in UU. He is at the very top of the list of people who say they've got questions for your answers. Ray is a thinker, and I'm happy to welcome him this morning to explore the question, are there atheists? Ray Rankin.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning. I remember a Playboy cartoon. I didn't just look at the pictures, okay? I noticed cartoons also. There was a wall. On it was scrawled, "God does not exist." Nietzsche. Beside it, Nietzsche does not exist. God. It's fair to ask, I think, do atheists exist? I know some atheists, not calling out any names, and clearly they exist. Although, in these days of deep fakes and holographic projections, maybe I should reserve judgment. On a related note, I'll see the new Matrix flick in a couple weeks. Where was I? Did you know that in 7 states, atheists cannot hold public office? And Georgia's not one of them. Amazing. So I can say with no fear of contradiction that in those states, office-holding atheists do not exist. When asked if he were an atheist, Einstein said it depends on your definition of God. Technically, atheists wouldn't exist if they, like Einstein, accepted Spinoza's pantheistic God, basically the force of nature. Of course, they might call the renaming unjustified. Why add a mystical connection to what physics has already described? Well, physics ain't enough. It might avow the force, and describe its mechanisms well enough, but it glosses over that nothing could be more fundamental. That it causes everything to happen. Everything. Energizing even the acts of humans, bending them, perhaps, in better directions. Bear with me. Does God exist? Many people far smarter than I am have wrestled with this, but I can't resist piling on. My belief is not quite pantheistic. It closer resembles process theology. PT, process theology, postulates that form constantly emerges from chaos, then decays back in. PT calls this becoming, then unraveling concept God. God as life's causative and destructive force. Wow, I just condensed 1,000 pages into 6 words. Reader's Digest, call me. I'm also fond of Taoism. Taoists seek to harmonize with the Tao, the energy of the universe, taking the Tao to be all there is. Fits my definition of God. Okay, so I may have conflated terms, but there's no Taoist here to argue me down, so I'll call the Tao God. Sue me. The point is, both suggest an all-powerful force, but not a controlling one. One that both creates and destroys. all unprovable, who cares? Well, I do. Why? Because it speaks to human motivations. I'm curious why people would work to protect a future they'll never see. Is goodness fundamental to human nature, motivating our day-to-day activity? Perhaps. Why call it polite or expected behavior when it fits the definition of doing for others and expecting no return? It's so instinctive, it's invisible to us. Consider that U.S. law institutionalizes greed. Yet the hippie movement began and flowered here, of all places, not Europe. Am I dealing in dogma? Well, sure, but dogma of the highest order. Empiricism and reason describe reality, but leave off how does it feel? I ask you, is it ethics, really? Heart over mind? Or is it logic that we either benefit others or we self-destroy? Can I defend this? Not really, but it's my presentation, my rules. I watch news with Pat at dinner time every day. Why do I do this to myself? I feel I should stay informed, but network news? It's outrage as entertainment, sensationalizing atrocious human behavior. If reality were really that ghastly, chaos would have long since swallowed us up. Our times are deplorable, no doubt. But look back at history in, say, 50-year increments. The times have absolutely improved. By every metric. Less war, less crime, fewer famines, more wealth, even among the poorest. And racial, ethnic, and LGBTQ animus has declined. It's a long arc, yes, and human behavior is still atrocious. But it's getting better. And something caused that. What? It wasn't necessitated precisely. It could have gone otherwise. And okay, selfish reasons could account for the rise of fairness, except they're unconvincing, convoluted. Economists, for example, point out that war wreaks havoc on both the winners and the losers. Everything destroyed must be rebuilt. Every person killed no longer creates wealth, incentivizing leaders to keep the peace. I don't think so. Have you seen our leaders? The bestseller Freakonomics. Have any of you read that? Yeah. Well, I knew you did. It explains social behavior in economic terms. Greed as the most basic human motivation. Please. Economic arguments sound clear-cut, but that's because economics has the hard statistics that sociology lacks. Sociological motivations are squishy, delivering squishy conclusions that cannot sell books. Bestsellers require small, digestible bites like the network news. However, measurable or not, the force of nature still drives us, by definition. And meanwhile, our behaviors get demonstrably better. There's a good chance, then, that the force is tending us toward good acts. So I call it God. Why not? Force of nature. For the record, I object, as atheists do, to closed, unchanging belief systems to reveal truth and those revealers who abuse that privileged position. There's a lot to object to. Absolutism, an anthropogenic God. Speaking of which, he looks pretty mad, doesn't he? Calling probing questions impiety. Well, it's not for me. I need to question, to challenge even. Teachers call this the discovery method, and it's proven far more likely to enlighten. Also, for the record, Buddhism, Taoism, and process theology consider change fundamental, not only of reality, but also of their theological tenets. I can live with that. And then there's Unitarian Universalists. We can live with almost anything. It irks me when atheists contrast theistic subjectivity with scientific objectivity. Science and faith are different domains. Scientific authority ends at the material, the observable. Their empirical judgments carry no weight in questions of God. It's beyond their purview. Yet, Carl Sagan, an atheist, posited this idea. If you can't distinguish between spiritual existence and what doesn't exist, then there is no distinction. The spiritual doesn't exist. Carl. Yeah, it's easy to get on people who aren't here. Sure, to a scientist, God having no material qualities indicates God doesn't exist. But to a believer, a God free of materiality testifies to Godhead perfection. God simply is. I am that I am. And by the way, if I was with Moses and saw a burning bush with the voice of God coming out of it, I would be the most sincere believer in Judas, in the faith of the only faith back then that you've ever seen. Most scientists do not disparage faith, but those that do ought to consider their objectivity as hardly sacrosanct. That scientists can and do assail the data and conclusions of others definitely lends credibility. However, anti-empirical issues can intrude, like unacknowledged assumptions, like data and conclusions co-opting and presuming each other, like, and this is the most damning, disregarding that what they extrapolate from nature might actually just be the patterns of how our brains work. To argue that God does not exist isn't supported by logic. The absence of evidence is no evidence that God doesn't exist. It's not an either-or argument. Yes, either God exists or doesn't, but the issue is our knowledge of God's existence. Well, there are proven things, okay, but there are also true things that may never be proven. Then there are, oh God, I sound like Rumsfeld. Okay, just know, never trust dichotomous statements. That's not how the world works. Many atheists argue that theists, as the claim makers, bear the burden of proof. It's often called Russell's teapot. He was a philosopher, and he said to claim that there's a teapot going around the world, going around the sun, is a really fantastic claim. And it's incumbent on those claim makers to provide proof. It's not incumbent on anybody else to disprove it. And why a teapot? Well, he's a Brit. I mean, first of all, we see a picture of it right there, so obviously it does exist. I don't know what he was going on about. Theists and atheists are both making claims. But atheists make the far grander claim. To state that God doesn't exist is arrogant. It presumes a knowledge we're not privy to. It's a part for whole fallacy. We don't know the universe in total. Bertram, that's his first name, let the atheist abide. They never sought proof in the first place. And, like J.B.S. Haldane once said, quote, I suspect the universe is not only queerer than we imagine, it is queerer than we can imagine. Queer in 1927 generally meant weird. Still, I wasn't in Haldane's head to fully know his thinking. Leaving that aside, most agree that the wider the perspective, the greater the validity. What's as yet undetected could still exist. That's the wider perspective. Scientists are hardly dishonest, and physicists, oddly, have been acting like theists. They seek a theory of everything. Widest possible perspective. Kind of godlike. Ever since Newton's overarching theories made physics the capstone science, they've been fervently seeking a TOE, theory of everything. Never mind that it's not necessitated by observation. They'll sidestep observation as king in their sacred quest for a TOE. It's their act of faith. Consider also that since 1927's uncertainty principle, physics proofs have been statistical. Physicists are an exacting lot, still, but they no longer seek exactitudes. Instead, they reason about ensembles of measurements, grading each for how well it fits into what's already known. Their theories tie now to likelihoods, to comfortable levels of acceptability. Science is a belief system, albeit one with huge pragmatic advantages over any other. I can't really do this idea justice. Just know that it hinges on propositional logic, a philosophy, mind you, that relates belief to plausibility, ranking along the continuum of possibly true to necessarily so. Okay, what's my beef with atheists? Even Pope Francis would open St. Peter's Gate for atheists who do good acts, and he's Catholic. You probably knew that. My gripe is that atheists would dismiss every possible God definition, even mine, and that's a sin. Worse, to me, some atheist arguments reek of cynicism, some of them, nihilistically rejecting that life might have a greater purpose. A philosophical point, but it galls me. I should take my happy pill. Last week, Connie enjoined us to coexist. She's right, of course. Definitions and labels like those in the deep dive I just took divide us. So forgive me, I shouldn't have made atheism a straw man, my whipping boy. It possesses aspects I never even brought up. And the atheists I know are ardent. They make this world a better place. But what is ardency if not nature's force manifesting? I remember Carl Sagan speaking with preacher zeal and shining eyes. Theist and atheist are teammates. Nomenclature's a moot point. Science may be exceedingly useful, but so is faith. So I'll take from both to negotiate meaning and probably stay confused, but it's okay. But I wonder sometimes why I seem to concenter the universe. It doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter which way I look. I'm in the middle. My mother did tell me I was special. Relativity rules out privileged position. Still, maybe it's as Lotze has it. The self and the universe spring from the same source, but have different names, like science and faith, each path emerging from us. God couldn't be expressed in a billion words, so I won't try. The more I talk, the more eyes glaze over. Not you, but I'll offer a few words. The moment. Life, the noun. Living, the verb. The compass of silence. The nothing that frames us. The path's unfolding. While the walking's yet possible, we should walk. Theist and atheist together, and silence would be best. The destination undetermined, it's up to us. And there's such beauty to this world. On this, all theists and atheists agree. Thank you.